Hello, welcome to, actually, I'm not going to tell you where I am. This is going to be one of those surprise location things, and if you guess the location, 1,000 cool points and a sticker to you. And I mean that. If you're the first person to guess where I am, then email me and give me a secure address and I'll send you a sticker. Sticker of my choosing. So like I said on my last video about Viking Hollywood tropes, Hollywood meaning kind of big Western mainstream media, because a lot of people very rightly pointed out that the choices I made were not filmed in Hollywood, California. They were mostly filmed in places like Iceland and Eastern Europe. My camera bag has fallen over. I'm going back to my roots, and this is going to be one of those videos about Viking myths, and I really like debunking Viking myths. It's one of the things I enjoy most about being a historical reenactor, is I get to take history that has been misrepresented or misunderstood for sometimes hundreds of years, and I get to give people new insights and new experiences of it. You'll have to forgive the wind, it's a breezy day, and this is the best place I could find that doesn't have the sound of jackhammers in my local area. So today we're going to do 5 Viking myths, and I know the title of this video suggests that you're all going to believe these myths. Most of you, if not all of you, will probably not believe most or all of them, because a lot of you are going to be my subscribers, and a lot of you guys are historical reenactors. But you know what? I've got 100,000 subscribers now. So I have to do clickbait titles for my videos, okay? So here are 5 Viking myths, let's say, that persist into the modern age. So the first one is, I think, a fairly common one amongst people who have a little bit of experience and who have read up a little bit about the Old Norse and about the Viking Age, and that is that Viking women had equality. Now, first off, we've got to do a little correcting of terms here, because, of course, the word Viking is a neologism. Vikinger is a neologism for people who were involved in maritime raiding from Scandinavian nations and from countries where they settled in the Viking Age, and as far as we can tell, mostly that was men. So, first off, we can kind of debate whether the term Viking women is even a thing, but we actually don't have that much evidence of full equality for Viking Age women in Old Norse cultures. That's a mouthful, right? Let's just say Viking women for now. I know. Forgive. So, what evidence do we have that Viking women had equality? Well, we have the testament of a man called Al-Tartushi, who was a Spanish-Arabic writer, traveller, explorer and merchant, who in the, I believe, 9th century went up to Heithabu. He went to Hedeby in Denmark, and he wrote that women, Norse women, Danish women, had the right to divorce their husbands, which was revolutionary in a lot of cultures at the time. It was quite depressingly rare that women had the right to leave their husband, to divorce their husband, and to start life anew if the situation was undesirable, for whatever reason. Later sagas talk about women being able to divorce their husbands for things like not being manly enough, not being masculine, wearing low-cut tunics that reveal too much of their chest, and some of that may well be exaggerated, some of that may well be sort of handed down generation after generation from the original truth of, yeah, women had the right to divorce in pre-Christian Old Norse society. There you go. That may be a seed, a grain of truth at the heart of a bigger, later misinterpretation of things. A lot of this comes from things like modern influencers and the internet, simplifying, oversimplifying, and exaggerating again the evidence that we have to make the Viking Age and to make Old Norse culture seem more approachable and more appealing, particularly people who are trying to, for example, sell neo-pagan equipment and regalia and clothing and a lifestyle, trying to make that seem more appealing than, yeah, well, okay, they may not have had full representation under the law, they may not have had full access to political positions, and they may not have had full property rights. They may not have done. We don't know a lot of this. We simply don't know. But you should still buy my cool top that has bind runes on it. So, the myth here is Viking women had full equality. The truth of it is, we just don't know. But it's unlikely, considering other Germanic cultures like the Anglo-Saxons, that they did. It's likely that they unfortunately did suffer some restrictions in terms of what they could do, like having political office. We know that women had huge influence and respect in Old Norse society, and you only need to look at the Oseberg burial. I hope that's a better pronunciation than last time. The Oseberg ship burial has 2 women, both of whom were probably quite wealthy, one of whom may well have been a queen or a high priestess of Old Norse religion. But it's very clear that women had positions of huge respect and importance, in particular when it comes to religion. Loud car. So the second myth that we're going to look at is that the Vikings were illiterate. That's nonsense. The Vikings and the Old Norse were not illiterate. We know this because we have their writings. We have rune stones. We have hundreds of rune stones from Scandinavia, from Sweden, from Norway, from Denmark. We also have runes in Great Britain, we have runes on the Isle of Man, we have runes in Ireland, we even have runes in, well, Istanbul, Constantinople, and in Venice now, from Old Norse people who travelled all across Europe and further afield. So they were leaving their runes carved in things, and runes were their writing system. They didn't use the Latin alphabet, at least not initially, and runes, instead of having an alphabet, have what is called a futhark, or a futhork, because those are the sounds of the first runes in the sequence. It works like an alphabet. It works like the word alphabet. You get it. Anyway, by the Viking Age, Old Norse people were using the Younger Futhark, which is a different set of runes to the Elder Futhark, and you often see the two mishmashed together in sort of neo-Viking, neo-Norse stuff on the internet, so be careful. Look up the Elder Futhark, the Younger Futhark, the Anglo-Saxon Futhark. It's absolutely fascinating. It's a really interesting writing system that was found all over Europe where the Norse ended up. And it seems like it was something that quite a chunk of society was able to do. Quite a lot of people seem to have been able to read and possibly write and read. It's likely that many people would be able to do things like recognize their own name written in runes, or the names of their patron gods and goddesses written in runes. If you particularly follow Tyr or Loki or Frigg, it's likely you'd be able to see that and go, this is a sacred grove to Tyr, because that's an important thing for you to be able to recognize, right? I'm not suggesting that they were all literate. I don't think there's a single society we've ever had that's been 100% literate. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. That would be a wonderful thing. If we've achieved that as a species, then hooray. But the fact that we have hundreds of inscriptions in the Younger Futhark from Old Norse countries and areas with Old Norse cultural contact tells you, they were super literate. They were writing poetry, they were writing dedications, they were writing stones to the memory of people and to battles. They had writing all over the place. They were even writing things on their possessions. That we have combs, bone combs, combs made of bone that have the owner's name scratched into them. People were writing the way we write today. They were doing graffiti on stuff. They were just carving their names into school desks. They weren't doing that. They didn't literally have school desks, but you know what I mean. I'm going to have a sip of my Stone Cold Cortado now. Refreshing. Oh boy. Where are we up to? That's number 2, right? Okay. So, myth number... Squirrel. Angry at me. Shush. I'm being educational. Leave me alone. I'm doing good. Calla. Gwiwer. The Welsh for squirrel. Gwiwer. Anyway, where were we? Number 3. So, myth number 3 is one that I thought we'd put to bed, and a lot of reenactors thought we'd put to bed, but no, it persists. People have asked me this in the last month. And then my mic died. Isn't that annoying? So I'm out here a day later, not that you can tell, because of the wizardry of YouTubing. And before we move on to our 3rd myth, let's talk about who's sponsoring this video. Hi, I'm here in a state-of-the-art recording studio to tell you that this video is sponsored by June's Journey. If you haven't heard of June's Journey, where have you been? June's Journey is a great free-to-download hidden object mystery game where you follow the adventures of June Parker, who is out to solve the murder of her sister back in 1920s New York and further afield. No spoilers. It's glamour, it is Agatha Christie. It is really good fun, and from April to June, the month, there is an Agatha Christie event happening in-game where you, as June, get to join forces with Hercule Poirot from the Agatha Christie novels, and you get to do the Murder on the Orient Express. You get to join in with Hercule Poirot. Who doesn't love that? I certainly do, because the Poirot novels were what got me into murder mysteries in the first place when I was a kid, so I'm super excited to be able to play through some of the storylines that I grew up reading, like Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, and I hope you'll be excited for it as well. I love playing June's Journey. It's great fun after shooting, after editing, after doing my emails. I really like focusing my mind on the hidden object mysteries. I like the challenge of them. I like trying to figure them out. I like trying to master every scene. And as you progress through these scenes with the hidden objects, you unlock clues that gets you further into the story. So if you like the sound of that, scan the QR code, go to the link in the description. But there's also another element to the game, which is the decorating your island element. You, as June Parker, have an estate. And this is my estate. Look at my little estate. And you unlock bits of the estate as you progress through the game, and you can decorate it. You can put trees in, you can put fountains in, you can put statues in. I've put a load of trees in because I really want my estate to have like a big oak forest at the back. I want it to feel like a deer park, you know? But if that sounds like your jam as well, get that QR code scanned, follow the link in the description, download June's Journey for free. It's available on iOS, Android, phones, tablets, and on PC. It's a great fun game, and it's absolutely beautifully made. The scenes are so beautifully rendered, everything looks fantastic. It's just got a wonderful atmosphere in it. You can join clubs, you can play on your own. It's a great fun game. I highly recommend it. I genuinely enjoy playing June's Journey. That's why it's on my phone. Go and get it downloaded, take part in the Agatha Christie event, have fun, and don't ask why I'm in a recording studio. Pretty slick, eh? That's why I make the big bucks. Moderate shillings, medium pimpin', bronze shoes, bronze teeth. So the third myth that we're going to talk about is, did Vikings wear horns on their helmets? And I genuinely thought that the horny hat myth was a thing of the past, but every reenactment I go to, every time I tell somebody that I am portraying an Old Norse person or doing an impression of a Viking, as we would now call them, people say, oh, I thought they had horns on their helmets. Genuinely and ironically, people still say, I thought they had horns on their helmets. And they didn't. There is zero evidence that Old Norse warriors wore horns on their helmets. The most recent that sort of becomes a thing is in the 19th century in the operas of Richard Wagner, because in the Ring cycle, the Nibelungen, the Ring of the Nibelungen operas in the 19th century, a costume designer decided that for Old Norse mythical figures, you know what would look really cool is if we stuck some wings and horns on the helmets to make them look more operatic. And that is where the horns on helmets thing came from. Now, some of you are going to go into the comments and you're going to say, but we have a depiction from a Viking Age helmet of somebody with a horned helmet on. That is not the case. What we have is a pre-Viking Age migration era helmet plaque. It's a decorative plaque from a helmet depicting some sort of mythical beast wearing a helmet with horns on it. It's not really the same thing as we have a Viking helmet with horns, is it? What we have is a Germanic, arguably, what's the word? Ritual? I'm going to say ritual. What we have is a helmet from a Germanic culture, which we don't know was used for combat. It may have simply been an ornamental helmet for parade use or rituals or whatever, with a decorative plaque with some sort of mythical beast doing what might be a war dance wearing a horned helmet. I think the horned helmets that we have are from the Bronze Age or the Iron Age in the Roman Empire, in the Roman period. Like we have a horned helmet from Great Britain, from Roman Great Britain, or just pre-Roman Great Britain, that has horns on it. They kind of look more like weird uddery things. But we have no evidence that the Old Norse had horns on their helmets. And yet, like I say, every time I do a reenactment, people will come up and they will say, oh, I thought they had horns on their hats. And it's because of Hagar the Horrible and Bugs Bunny and all those depictions that we have, and even How to Train Your Dragon. So, like, I love How to Train Your Dragon, don't get me wrong, but they're perpetuating the myth with the horny hats. So, no horny hats. Now, I myself have worn some hats that were pretty horny in my time, but never when I'm doing an actual reenactment display. There's a squirrel. Again. Just always here when I'm filming. So, there you go. We now know that Viking Age Norse women may have had more rights than many other women in many other societies, but we don't actually have that much evidence of full equality. We know that the Vikings and the Old Norse were literate because we've got runes and we've got rune stones. We know that they didn't wear horns on their helmets. There's no evidence that they wore horns on their helmets. Now, we do have evidence of Old Norse helmets. We know that they were wearing helmets. There is this myth that they went bareheaded, that they didn't wear helmets in battle. But we have evidence of helmets from countries that were culturally Old Norse. Like we have the Geirmundbu helmet, we have fragments of the Chella helmet, we have the Yarm helmet from Yarm in the north of England, which in the Viking Age, at least in part of the Viking Age, was almost certainly under the Dane law and therefore culturally Old Norse to a large extent. So we actually have fragments of helmets. We have many more fragments, smaller fragments of things like the spectacle, the faceplate that covers your face in the helmet. So yeah, they did wear helmets. They absolutely wore helmets, but helmets were really expensive, especially metal helmets. So they may not have just been wearing metal helmets. They may have been leather or bone or other organic materials that were used, fabric and so forth. But that rots very, very quickly, and it's rare that we get those surviving in the archaeological record, unless it's under very, very specific conditions. So we don't have huge archaeological evidence for helmets, but we do know that they were wearing them. We have fragments of them. We know other cultures, like the Franks and the Anglo-Saxons, were using helmets. So yes, helmets were a thing. They wore helmets. They were not horny. The helmets. Stop it. All right, so number 4, our fourth one, is going to be, our fourth myth, is going to be that they hated Christians, that the Old Norse hated Christians. And this myth has sort of risen up in the internet age. I think this is an internet thing because you get a lot of polarization on the internet. You get a lot of, if you are not with me, you are against me. If you don't have an opinion on this, your opinion must be the opposite of mine, all that kind of stuff. And that lack of nuance has seeped into the discussion of Old Norse and early medieval religion. And it's simply not true. We have, I would say, no evidence that the Old Norse, pre-Christian heathen practitioners, whatever you want to call them, pagans, hated Christians. In fact, we have evidence of the opposite. Quite plentiful evidence of the opposite. We have evidence of Old Norse people converting to Christianity en masse. We have evidence of them converting without threats of violence. We do have evidence, don't get me wrong, we do have evidence of violent conversion, of repeated missions to Norse countries and regions and non-Christian, non-Norse regions of Europe. You think about Catholic missionaries going up to Friesland and Denmark and cutting down sacred trees and defiling temples and areas of worship and that kind of thing. But we also have people like Harald Bluetooth, who boasted that he had Christianized Denmark in the 10th century, smack bang in the middle of the Viking Age. We have a Norse king boasting that he had Christianized his country. We have evidence that Viking activity carried on after that, so we've almost certainly therefore got Christian Vikings carrying out Viking raids against other Christians and against Old Norse practitioners. Like, this is a thing. We have Rollo in Normandy converting to Christianity and agreeing to protect the north coast of France from Viking raids in exchange for land. So a lot of Old Norse people seem to have converted readily to Christianity if it seemed like the practical thing to do, if it seemed like the most profitable thing you could do. A lot of these people were effectively merchant adventurers. They were out looking to make a living, looking to make some dough. A lot of them were noblemen, a lot of them might have been younger sons who weren't likely to inherit as much of their father's estate, and a lot of them would readily change their religion if it meant that they had security in the future for themselves and for their followers and their families. And we have so much wonderful evidence of the two religions living side by side, from things like crosses on the Isle of Man, which I mentioned in my last video. We have a cross on the Isle of Man with Sigurd and Fafnir on one side and the crucifixion of Christ on the other side. So these are two religions literally living side by side on an inscribed cross that would have taken hundreds of hours to make by a craftsman, with familiarity of both of those religious traditions. So Christianity and Old Norse religion, yes, there was a lot of friction between them with things like raids against monasteries, but most of the negativity we get is from the Christian perspective. And that's understandable, right? If a bunch of dudes come and raid and pillage your undefended religious sites, I mean, today that's a war crime, right? Back then it would have been seen as absolutely horrific, a horrifying, unthinkable act to a bishop or an abbot. But to an Old Norse raider, well, yeah, I mean, if you're going to leave these places undefended on the coast, we're obviously going to raid them. That is our culture. We come from a culture where this is regular practice, and has been for decades, if not centuries. 793 in the attack on Lindisfarne wasn't the start of the Viking Age, after all. In 789, we know that there was a Viking raid on the south coast of England in Wessex, so there's another myth. Bonus myth, the Viking Age started in 793. Nuh-uh, we know that 4 years earlier, at least, there were raids on the south coast of England, so they obviously knew where Great Britain was already, before they came to Lindisfarne. So, from a Christian perspective, you can see the anger, you can understand the anger, you can understand the frustration, this like, these people, they just come here and they attack places they're not supposed to attack, they're not playing by the rules. And eventually Alfred the Great gets off his ass and goes, oh, well, maybe a network of fortified settlements with permanent garrisons would be a good idea to stymie these larger scale attacks that we've been suffering. Thanks, Charlemagne. If you want a video on how Alfred the Great just stole all of his tactics from Charlemagne, let me know in the comments, because I have thoughts on that. But yeah, there's no evidence that the pagans hated the Christians in that way. This is such an internet thing where there will be stupid memes of like a big hyper-muscular Viking dude being like, I would rather die than bow at the altar of your Christ. Like, no, nonsense. Absolute nonsense. If you were offered a sack of silver, you leave Paris alone. If you're offered a sack of jewels, you leave York Minster alone. If you're offered enough land for you and your mates to settle down and have farms, you convert. You even change your name, you get baptized, and you become Rollo the Norman. So, nah, not a thing. Absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. Alright, so it's time for our fifth myth. If you've got any other myths about the Viking Age that you can think of, like, pop them in the comments, because the comment section on this channel is so nice. People always have loads of lovely information. I know we've got archaeologists, I know we've got historians who watch these videos, so if you've got any popular myths or misconceptions about the Viking Age, pop them in the comments. They'd be lovely to have. So we're going to do our final one, our final myth, and our final myth is that the Vikings were barbarians, right? So the idea of a barbarian is a classical Greek and Roman idea, and these are people who are uncivilized. They don't have a republic, they don't have democracy, they don't have philosophers, they don't write, they don't read, they don't have, you know, games and religious sacrilegious. They don't have religious festivals and that kind of thing. They are just these barbaric, uncivilized people. Think about Conan the Barbarian and like the barbarity and savagery and all that kind of stuff. And there's this popular misconception that ties a lot of the previous stuff in. But that's what the Vikings were. They were these illiterate brutes that just pillaged and raided and assaulted their way around Europe for a couple of hundred years before Christianity turned up and ruined everything. And that's simply not true. And we know that that's not true from what we've just talked about. They wrote, they had runestones, they had flighting, and they had skaldic poetry. They had long halls where communities would get together and listen to stories and poetry and celebrate their ancestors and remember people who had died. They had huge funerals. We know that they made incredible works of art. We know from people like Al-Tartushi that in the 9th century they were a fully developed mercantile culture. Old Norse culture was around for hundreds and hundreds of years before the Viking age proper began, as we think of it. We know that people were writing in runes and worshipping the Old Norse pantheon of gods for centuries before Lindisfarne was attacked, before Wessex was raided in 789. And they were making incredible jewellery, they were making works of art, and they were adopting and adapting cultural elements from places that they went to. So, for example, when the Old Norse travelled eastwards to the Volga, they became the Volga Rus. They became the Rus, and the Rus were an amalgamation of cultures. Yes, there was a lot of Old Norse culture, but there were also cultures from other areas, from Slavic areas, and they adapted and they adopted and they became a different culture over time. That's how human culture works. When they went to Ireland, they adopted and adapted parts of Irish culture and they became the Hiberno-Norse. And if you've seen some of the incredible jewellery, the penannular brooches in the National Museum Ireland archaeology collection, you can see that they were not barbarians. They weren't these dirty people wearing scraps of leather and skin and just muck, tatty clothes. They didn't wash their faces. They've got scruffy beard and hair. And you see it in TV shows that are supposedly lauding and glorifying Old Norse culture. And they're just depicted as these barbaric savages. Everything's dark, everything's gloomy. All they care about is violence and death, misery. Whereas the actual evidence we have is for a highly complex, well-established society. Yes, it's polytheistic, but so are many societies. And yes, they engaged in raiding and warfare, but so did every other society and culture in Europe in the period. And they farmed and they fished and they built houses and towns and buried their dead, and sometimes buried their dead in the most spectacular fashion, and sent them off with examples of their finest craftsmanship. If you just look at the tortoise brooches that we dig up, they're incredible. Some of the filigree work in the jewellery is almost microscopic. They were chip carving gems and casting jewellery, and some of the jewellery shows the religions living side by side. Like we have, I think from Norway, a mould to make Mjolnir and crosses in one mould. There's a pendant mould with 2 mould holes to make a cross and to make a Thor's hammer. So people were capitalizing on these multiple religions that were present in society at the time. They were living, they were trading, they were working, they were writing. They were erecting hundreds of runestones. They were inscribing their well-loved precious possessions with their names and with poems and even with magic. So this was a highly complex society, and if you go to a reenactment and you're unlucky and you go to one where people don't necessarily care as much about the history, you might see people wearing tatty clothes that haven't been repaired, and their excuse might be, well, they wouldn't have had nice clean clothes in the period, would they? Yeah, they absolutely would. They would have washed their wool in snow. As many of you pointed out in the comments of my last video, you can wash wool in snow. It's a very effective way of washing wool. Go to Norway, find out. And they would have brushed their clothes. They would have patched and sewn and maintained their clothes. They wore socks and mittens, and they made shoes and booties for their kids and kept them warm in nice wool cloaks, and they dyed them wonderful colours. You can get pinks and purples and reds and yellows and blues and greens and browns and oranges and all the colours of the bow, man, from natural dyes available at the time, and they were using those natural dyes. In fact, the majority of the cloth from the period that we have was dyed in some way. It's a very loud bird up there. Oh, and there's another one. There, their friends have arrived. But they weren't barbarians. Calling them barbarians is... I mean, it's a lie, isn't it? Really? With all of that? Considering they were relatively forward-thinking in their treatment of women at the time. They had concepts beyond the binary for gender expression. They had a highly developed, centuries-old polytheistic religion and magical traditions. They wrote, they read, they recited poetry, they played music, they engaged in warfare and politics, they made fantastic jewellery, they dressed in fashions that changed generation to generation. Multiple different schools of artwork, like the Urnes style and the Yelling style, and the Mammon style, which is my personal favourite. Old Norse art school is Mammon style, just so we know. And they developed into the medieval Norse society. When they Christianized, they adapted and they adopted and they changed. And that's kind of how we work as a species over time. We change, we adopt, we adapt, we become different. And people like me who are interested in where we come from try to dig the truth out of the past so that we can understand where we've come from, because we're different people to who we were 1,000 years ago. And that's okay, that's cool. Societies develop, they change, they rise and fall, and that's cool, that's interesting. That's what gives us archaeology, it's what gives us mysteries from the past to solve. So, thanks again to June's Journey for sponsoring this video. Don't forget, if you want to download June's Journey for free, you can follow the link in the description, scan the QR code, and go and have fun with June and Monsieur Poirot. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Diolch yn fawr iawn am wylio. Thank you very much for watching. A couple of people confused by what language I break into at the end of my videos. It's Cymraeg. It's Welsh, hence the name of the channel. So diolch yn fawr am wylio. Thank you very much for watching. Tan y tro nesa. Until the next time, hwyl am y tro. Bye bye for now. And next time, I'm going to keep my microphone charged up.
Big, manly, horny, helmeted Viking thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. Ho 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 ho. Look at them all. You are all wonderful human beings. Masculine Viking thanks to you all. Ho 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 ho. Yes. Yes. Delicious names.